follow the advice of the
Raise my daughter's
Welcome, everyone, to the joint elected officials meeting for May 24th. That's where we talk about issues the City of Eugene, the City of Springfield, and Lane County all share. We have an important discussion today, and I'm going to call the Eugene City Council meeting to go ahead.
Okay, so I'll call the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting to order, and we do have a quorum.
And I will call the Springfield City Council meeting to order, and we also have a quorum.
And why don't we, I think we're being televised, so it's always good when you do that to introduce who's around the table.
You
So,
might get Lane Merle called on.
oh, sorry, Lane Rural.
I will call the Lane Rural Board to order at 12 o'clock,
Thank you for that.
and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Sorry about that. And did I forget anybody else? Good. All right. So why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves before we begin the work of the day. I'm Kitty Piercy, the Mayor of Eugene.
Sid Lykin, Lane County Board.
Christine Lundberg, Mayor Springfield.
Randy Groves, Fire Chief, Cities of Eugene and Springfield.
Dale Borland, Fire Chief, Lane Rural Fire Rescue.
Derek Von Moose, Lane Rule.
Betty Taylor, Eugene City Councilor.
Sherry Moore, City of Springfield.
Jay Bozovich, West Lane County Commissioner. Faye Stewart, East Lane County Commissioner.
Andrea Ortiz, Eugene City Council.
Joe Pishneri, City of Council, Springfield.
Pat Farr, Eugene City Council.
George Brown, Eugene City Council.
Hillary Wiley, Springfield City Council.
Dave Rawson, Springfield City Council.
Don Baxter, Lane Rural Fire Rescue.
Chris Pryor, Eugene City Council.
Pete Holmes, Lane Rural Fire and Rescue.
Marilee Woodrow, Springfield City Council.
Sean Mann Gordon, Springfield City Council.
George Poling, Eugene City Council.
John Reese, City Manager in Eugene.
Gino Grimaldi, City of Springfield.
Leanne Richardson, Lane County.
Jim Drew, Lane Rural Fire Rescue.
Okay, and to remind you all, because we all forget it too easily, please don't rustle papers next to the mic because it's very sensitive. And also be careful about your sidebar conversations. You may be sharing them with the world at large. So just so you know. Okay, so today we're going to be hearing about the ambulance transport system, and I'm going to turn this over to
Chief Groves.
actually Commissioner Bosevich is going to start us out.
And thank you, Mayor Piercy, fellow elected officials. So we're here today to talk about the ambulance transport system, and it seems like for some of you that we were just here a few years ago listening to the first ambulance task force report. So that task force was there because of some financial instability in the system then. Some things were done. Things were going okay, but we're back on the cliff edge again with our financial stability. So the purpose of this report is to report back the task force findings. We've been meeting since January, or was it before then? It's been late October, sorry. Memory is going with age. Actually, it's all those long budget committee meetings. So it's been a long education for us that are on the task force. So I'd like to introduce the task force to you real quick, and who's on there. It's myself, Councilor Ortiz, Councilor Clark, who's not present today, Councilor Van Gordon, Councilor Woodrow, from the Lane Rural Fire District Board, Vice President Pete Holmes. Where'd Pete go? There he is. Yeah. And there's Secretary Treasurer Jim Drew. We're the elected officials on the task force. We're supported by the staff of the Joint Fire Department. I guess I don't know how you describe Eugene Springfield at this time. Still separate fire departments, but joint management, and the staff from Lane Rural, and with a lot of other staff help. So we spent a long time learning, and we're going to try and get this all transferred to you all in a very short time. But the first thing I want to do is that the task force agreed on one universal statement relative to ambulance transport. and that's that we consider ambulance transport a core service that must be accessible to the residents and visitors of Central Lane County, regardless of ability to pay. And that's a pretty big statement to make, but like public safety, when you call 911, it shouldn't matter what your financial status is, whether you're a visitor or a resident, a taxpayer, or whatever. You expect somebody to show up and have service. It's just a core part of why we have government, to protect people's safety. And we felt strong enough to have this statement as our opening statement. With that, our agenda today is we're going to talk a little bit about the service areas as they currently exist, a history. We're going to define the problem to everybody. We're going to talk about the three options we came up with, and then we're going to discuss, our preferred option, I guess, that the task force is leaning towards, and answer questions. And that's where we're going. So one of the questions that kind of comes up, and if you go to the next slide, is why in the world is a Lane County Commissioner on an ambulance task force? Because we don't provide any ambulance services directly. It's because we're the authority for assigning ambulance service areas in Lane County. We're delegated that authority by the state through ORS 682, and we're the ones that decide who serves where in Lane County and what levels of service are required. So that's why Lane County is involved and is kind of the central glue in all this. And I'm going to turn it over to Chief Groves now so he can explain why there's shading that doesn't match up to the lines on the ambulance service areas.
Thank you, Commissioner Bosevich, and thank you to all of you for the opportunity to be here. Chief Borland, my esteemed colleague here, and I are very interested in trying to set the course for the future under very difficult times with funding and also capacity. The map up there that you see is Lane County. It depicts the 8 ambulance service areas that are served within the county. Some of them are very small pieces. For example, to the extreme north, you'll see Corvallis comes into a small piece of that. The 3 ambulance service areas we're going to be speaking to today are ASA number 4, which is served by the Eugene Fire and EMS Department, ASA 5, which is served by the Springfield Fire and Life Safety Department, and ASA 8, served by Lane Rural Fire Rescue. Collectively, we serve in excess of 80% of the population of Lane County. I will also add that all the ambulance service areas in the county are experiencing some of the same challenges that we are in Central Lane County, as is the rest of the state, as is the rest of the country. You'll see some different shading in ambulance service area 4, the green-gray area. One of the outcomes that I'll go into a little bit more detail later from the previous task force that met in 2009, one of the recommendations was to look at more of a rural-urban split between ambulance service area 8 and ambulance service area 4. We have made that split under, at this point, an intergovernmental agreement. We will be looking with a little more analysis at petitioning the county to make a full split at some point in the hopefully near future. Next slide, please. I want to touch on history briefly. In 1981, the 2 city fire departments assumed responsibility for the ambulance service areas, what is now ASA 4, 5, and 8, with about 8 to 10 hours of notice. I know I was here at that time. I remember it very well. From that time until the federal government changed some of the reimbursement structure, there was actually a money-making venture that actually helped offset some of the costs that are borne by the general fund for the 2 fire departments. Everything was operating fairly well until about 1997. We saw the first signs of trouble when the federal government enacted the Federal Balanced Budget Act. That started reducing some of our reimbursements at that time in a phased-in approach. In 2001, Lane Rural Fire Rescue formed Ambulance Service Area Number 8, as you saw on the map on the preceding page, out of what was formerly ASA 4, Eugene. Then in 2003, the Medicare Modernization Act was enacted. That was the next stair step in some of our financial issues that you will see more about later. That was a phased-in approach where the deadline for full implementation has been moved back a number of times, but it's looming out there, and we're already in trouble. Then 2008, we all experienced a recession, which made the number of insured patients and people able to pay for their ambulance services. It reduced those reimbursements. 2009, we formed the first joint elected officials group that we'll talk more about later. They came up with a set of solutions that we've implemented. It helped us kind of get our head above water. I describe us as a drowning person that is going under, and the help that we got from the first task force has allowed us to get a breath of air that's balanced the budget for 2 years. We're going under again. 2009 to 11, we experienced a deficit in the two cities. Lane Rural is continuing to experience a deficit. The two cities provided general fund support to balance the budget. The gap continued. It was going to continue to grow, but we implemented some task force recommendations in 2010, as I mentioned, that helped push that out. Also in 2010, we petitioned the Lane County Board of Commissioners to make some revisions to Lane County Code Chapter 18, which provides for the ambulance service areas. One of the things that we found was that there was really no oversight for non-emergency transports that were taking place, and that was part of the solution that we wanted to implement to help right the ship. So we went and asked the county to change the code to come in line with ORS and provide the oversight for non-emergency transport to each ASA holder, which they did. It has helped the system. It's allowed for a public-private partnership that we have in the metro area with Rural Metro Ambulance. 2011, we formed the second JEO Ambulance Transport System Task Force, and this is the report out from the work that we have been doing as a group since late October. 2012 and 2013, this is fiscal year Ambulance Service Area 4, Eugene, Ambulance Service Area 5. As I mentioned, we were able to balance the budget. We are projecting a deficit in 2014. Next slide, please. Essentially, we have a structural deficit in our budget. Our costs are greater than our revenues, and this has been a growing problem that's become progressively worse. Also, I wanted to highlight, there's a story in your packet out of the Registered Guard where they talked about the percentage of Medicaid and Medicare patients that we are experiencing here in Central Lane County, and they benchmarked our metro area against Corvallis and Bend, and you can see that the percentage of Medicare and Medicaid patients in the metro area is 70% roughly, compared to 59% in Corvallis and 55% in Bend. Well, why does this matter? Simply stated is the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements are capitated, which means you get a set cost regardless of how much you charge or how much your service costs to deliver. For example, our average reimbursement for emergency transports from Medicare and Medicaid is $405. The average cost to deliver the service per transport is $625. So at 70% of our call volume, and we're losing roughly a little over $200 per call over what it costs to provide the service, we obviously have a structural imbalance. Our current transport rate at the same time, as you see, it costs $625 to provide the service if everybody were able to pay for the service, yet our transport rate is $1,600 plus $20 per mile, which is a very high rate. In fiscal year 11, we had 21,709 transports in the three ASAs. We responded to more calls than that, and we'll get into that a little bit more down in the presentation. Also, with the recession, we've experienced more indigent, uninsured, and underinsured patients, and some other problems that have come with that, again, we'll talk about a little further in the presentation. And revenues are constrained by current resources, meaning we have a capacity problem as well. We already today don't have enough resource on the street. We have taken some steps to help with the capacity issue, which we'll go into here in a bit. Next slide, please. So this graph depicts what I was just describing with the financial gap, the structural problem that we have. You'll see the expenditure line and how that's grown over time, projected out to 2030. You'll see if every transport, if the patient were able to pay the $625 per call, you'll see that we would keep pace with the increase in call volume. But it also shows what our flat revenue line looks like with the capitated payments and inability to collect for the cost of the service. And so that depicts what the gap will be into the future. Next slide, please. We like to talk a lot in terms of the three-legged financial stool and having stability. Before we started tweaking the system and trying to innovate, we basically had two sources to fund the system, and that was user fees and fees from FireMed, as well as standby fees when we go to U of O games, for example, or different events where a standby unit is required, and we get a reimbursement for that. As you'll see in the graph or the depiction to the right here, we've kind of cobbled together a number of things to temporarily support the stool and keep it upright. Still have our user fees, which are inadequate. We have FireMed and standby fees, and we've also made some operational changes. We've had some general fund transfers to support the service and maintain our ability to deliver the service. We've increased base rate and mileage, which, again, with capitated payments, that does nothing to bring in more revenue in those instances, but for insured patients, patients that are able to pay, it helps a little bit. And we've also looked for ways to reduce our expenditures. Next slide, please. So as we go forward and looking to the future, we're trying to find a permanent funding source, whatever that may be, that stabilizes the system now and into the future. Next slide, please. Speaking to our capacity problem, which incidentally also makes our financial situation worse in the future, we have an aging population, the graying of America. We have the baby boomers. We're all hitting the retirement age, and I'm guessing most of us at the table, or including myself, are in that boat. And as that population bubble pushes out into retirement, we're all going to need those services as well at a greater rate. We're also a rounding error in what is a much larger healthcare problem in our country. People are defaulting to EMS for primary care. They are not seeking preventative care. In many cases, we are the front line going out and treating people that there's probably better ways to deliver that service. If you go down in the metro areas of the large urban areas like Los Angeles, the problem is at a very high level, to the point where hospitals are even closing, which just keeps exacerbating the problem. We're seeing an increase in underinsured and uninsured populations, a lot attributed to the recession and economic conditions, and untreated chronic problems that become acute problems. I spoke in the first sub-bullet of the second issue of a broken healthcare system. We have people that are seeking service from us that, as I said, there's a better way to provide the service. But we also have legitimate emergency calls because people are not seeking health care. You know, a respiratory problem transitions into pneumonia, things that become more acute, more chronic, and again, that's dragging down the system as well. And then while we have a problem with adequate capacity, we have funding constraints that don't allow us to provide enough units on the street. Next slide, please. So this is a look at projected growth from the U.S. Census Bureau and Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. This is what our trend line is looking like with our aging population. That's going to make the problem far worse in the future. You can see right there the forecast, especially for the 65 to 74 age group, how that's bumping up. And again, that's just kind of the leading edge of our baby boom population as we move forward. Likewise, as we project out past 2020, I would submit that the second and third lines are going to have a high vertical climb as well, and the trend is going to go up. People are living longer. We've got a growing number of people in these categories. They are the people we see most frequently with our ambulance system. Next slide, please. This is a look at our Lane County population in aging. The top line is the line of just natural growth. You can see the bottom line, what it looks like as far as the percentage of our population that is going to be in that graying category. And that takes us up through 2030. Next slide, please.
Chief Groves, what was the
Yes, Councilor.
what was the slide before? What population group was that? Was that
This slide here, Council?
yes?
That is looking at our senior population. The top line is 65 to 74.
What is this? Lane County or is
No,
it?
this is actually Oregon.
Oh, Oregon.
I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. This is for the state of Oregon, the projections.
Thank you.
But it's taken from the U.S. population. Then we've tried to hone it in on Lane County, and so that's what we're looking at. Looking at what our percentage of gross charges are, putting it into a graphic, you'll see that Medicare and Medicaid are right at 70%. Insurance is 18%. Private pay is 12%. The reality is the 18% in the insured category and a very, very small percentage of the 12% in the private pay is what's paying for the entire system. And that's why the cost per transport is so high. That's why it's $1,600 instead of in the $600 range. Next slide, please. This looks at combined medic unit responses by ambulance service area. The gray part of the bar graph is ASA 4 Eugene. The red is Springfield. The green is Lane Rural. You saw in one of the early slides with the map of the ASAs, ambulance service areas, that Lane Rural has picked up a part of Eugene's ambulance service area. Well, for the purpose of this graphic, the responses that Lane Rural is providing are still in ambulance service area 4 till we change that, so Lane Rural is picking up a piece of that gray part of the bar graph. Next slide, please. This is a look at call volume between the combined agencies. The top line is, or the gray line is dispatches and arrivals on scene. The red line is the number of calls that actually resulted in transports. We don't transport everybody that we respond on. I've had questions asked in the past, do you have a problem with forcing people to go to the hospital? We can't force people to go to the hospital. In fact, I generally receive more complaints, and we don't receive many, but we receive more complaints because we didn't transport somebody rather than trying to strong-arm them to go to the hospital. So that's kind of a look at that piece over a 5-year period. Counselor?
So, do you inform people at the time that you arrive what the costs are going to be? And then they decide, well, I can't do that, and then they decide not to go to the hospital? I mean, how often does that happen?
I'm sure that's a piece of that. We don't really have a way of tracking that component, but I'm sure that's a piece of this.
But you do tell them what
Yes,
the cost
we
is?
do.
Okay.
Yes, we do. And it's, when we tell them, it's usually, if a person's unconscious or chronic, we don't spend a lot of time discussing the options and the implications. We're generally attending to business, treating them, trying to stabilize them, package them, and transport. But there are those where you can have a discussion with, and in some instances there are alternative transportation modes where they aren't critical, they aren't serious even, they just need to be tried to address. You had a comment?
You covered it. You answered it.
Oh, very good. Next slide, please. Thank you for multitasking sentiment. Talking just briefly about our 2009 task force, we had from the county commissioner Rob Handy, Springfield councilors Dave Ralston and Hillary Wiley, Eugene councilors Andrea Ortiz and Mike Clark, Lane Rural Fire Rescue board members Kevin King and Larry Von Moose. And I want to say a special thank you to former councilor John Woodrow, who began serving on the task force and prior to Hillary Wiley, and contributed greatly. A very good person to work with. It was a tragic loss for our city and our region. Next slide, please. This is a look at the 2009 task force recommendations. The first one was that all 3 jurisdictions be prepared to financially support the ambulance system, which they have and did. The second one was that Eugene and Springfield initiate steps towards a fire merger. There is recognition that reducing the number of administrators could add savings to the ambulance fund. We have done that. We're trying to take it to the next level at this point. You've all received information on the financial savings that have been produced with the merger initiative, as well as the service enhancements. Enhance the fire med program. We've done about the best we can do with that, so we actually came at that issue a slightly different way. We started focusing on the net and not the gross, and since that time we've actually trimmed our overhead by over 30%. And so at the same time, the program has still grown. We're going to watch that very closely because there's definitely a correlation between money invested in information to the public and advertisement and revenue derived. But at least for the short haul, we have been reducing a significant amount of overhead. Also, we were to explore more stable public funding options. That's an area we haven't done much more on, just because, quite frankly, we've done environmental scans. We have, basically looked high and low, and we haven't found a good option. There has been some work, and you'll see a little later around what an ambulance service district might look like. But that's the one area we have not really found much on. And the next recommendation was to evaluate reconfiguration of Ambulance Service Area 4, Eugene, and Ambulance Service Area 8, Lane Rural, looking at the boundaries. And as you saw on the earlier map, we've actually worked very collaboratively in a good partnership to do just that. And it seems to be working well and helping the Eugene end with some of the capacity issues, helping Lane Rural with some of the financial issues, and so we're going to continue to evaluate that, and again, hopefully in short order, we will be coming with a recommendation back to the BCC. Another recommendation was work towards a mobile health care system, which basically is another tier in the system. That's more of a travel to your home or your location and treat minor issues, minor illnesses and injuries, and release without tying up the ambulance capacity issue, without tying up the emergency departments in our hospitals. Chief Murphy, retired Chief Murphy from Springfield, has been the champion of that cause. He is still working on that. We have not been successful in finding a grant financial stream to help build the test site. He does have some commitments out of Los Angeles County that are interested in looking at it because, again, they're kind of the epicenter of the problem we are experiencing here locally. And then public ambulance services continue to lobby Congress, which we do. I've lost count of how many letters I have written. Our Delegations from the cities, I know, bring this up through United Front. Brenda Wilson has lobbied at both the state level for Medicaid and also at the federal level for Medicare. We've worked with our congressional delegation who's been successful in helping to push the final implementations of the Medicare Modernization Act out, but it's still continuing to march forward.
Chief, have you had any, I know when we were there for the United Front trip, Senator Wyden expressed some renewed commitment to that. Have you had a recent conversation with him about it?
Not recent. I have had conversations with his staff, and as I have with Peter DeFazio and his staff, nothing current. Next slide, please. We also implemented some additional measures that we looked at and developed on our own outside of the task force recommendation. One that I personally believe in as I look at the system, I don't believe a one-size-fits-all is the best way to manage our emergency medical system. We have entered into two very important partnerships in the metro area, and that's with Life Flight, which now flies out of the Second Chambers campus, and they handle our distant critical care transports. They perform scene work as well as inter-facility work, which keeps our finite resource of ambulances here in the area to protect our citizens. And it's also a faster and statistically safer way to travel. We've also entered into a very important partnership with Rural Metro Ambulance through a RFP process, and they provide non-emergency and inter-facility transports in the metro area with the two cities. Change is always difficult. It probably took us longer than I would have anticipated to implement that, but it has shown some good success. It has helped us with our capacity issue. It has helped us hone in on emergency scene work, which is what we do best. When you look at the cost of one of our emergency advanced life support firefighter paramedic ambulances with the equipment they carry, it's a better utilization of service. We're trying to fit the service system with the type of call, and we've had, I think, very good success with that. We've also implemented electronic patient care reports, which provide better data for the hospitals, faster data, as well as they allow for same-day billing, which is very important in the collection arena of an ambulance system. From a business standpoint, you get in line with insurance for motor vehicle accidents, for health care, and generally the policies only have so much money in them. And whoever's first in line generally gets paid. At the back end of the line, sometimes they don't. That's helped with our collections. As I mentioned in a previous slide, we've reduced our fire med program overhead by over 30%. We've increased fees for service, which actually was our recommendation out of the last task force, or at least it was discussed. And we've also added additional fees for out of our service areas. So if it's a patient that's traveling through that isn't contributing to some of the tax base that's helped support the system, they pay a higher rate. Next slide, please. And I'll turn this back over to the elected officials, but essentially three options we looked at as we worked through this difficult issue. The three options were do nothing, which basically the money needs to be made up somehow, the gap, privatization, and an ambulance transport district. So with that, I will turn that back to the elected officials.
Okay.
You're going to take on the next.
Okay. I'm going to discuss option one. Option one says do nothing, which is kind of misleading. Do nothing means that the three ambulance service areas continue to fund the ambulance service out of their general fund, which means that we take care of all the increases in cost and figure out ambulance service billing. One option is higher billing, but higher billing also brings about fewer people paying because they can't afford it. And at some point, the insurance companies are going to start balking on the high cost of service. We'll limit the revenue, or we get limited revenue from Medicare, Medicaid. If that drops further, it just makes the problem bigger. So what we have is we have 3 districts in the Central Lane area that have the service. We have 15-plus districts that don't pay for the basic cost of service. All we get from them is the user fees when we go into their districts. We also have unincorporated areas within the county that we don't get money for except when we go into that area for service. So we miss all of those possibilities. And so the existing 3 districts are for, if you want to include South Lane Rural, bear the brunt of the increase in cost, or the cost. In Lane Rural's experience, our last year, we paid for $260,000 in cost for our ambulance service over and above what we received from billing. And I don't know who has option number 2.
I've got option number 2, which is privatization. The first thing you got to think about is really this is a gradient. Right now we do a little bit of privatization because non-critical transports are done by our partners in rural metros. So when we talk about this can go from what we're doing right now all the way through, using a private company to do all our ambulance transports. One of the important things is that privatization, we'd still do first response with the current fire department. And the ambulance fees pay for administration and training and a medical director and additional operations supervisors. So under full private model, Eugene would be looking at an additional $1.3 million and Springfield $800,000 in administration costs that are paid for with ambulance transport fees now that could potentially have to go into the general fund. Now, the other thing you've got to think about is that we dual utilize paramedics and firefighters now. Our paramedics can be firefighters and are planned in our fire suppression staffing. So under a full private model, we wouldn't be able to use paramedics as firefighters, and so there's a question on whether or not we need to increase our fire suppression staffing. So what I asked the fire department to do was put up the total additional headcount that might be discussed under a full privatization model. And the last thing to consider is that any time we move along that gradient is we have to make changes to Lane County Chapter 18. So there's a time limit involved with that. That it takes a lot of discussion, a lot of effort to make and update those changes. So where we are with privatization is we can do more work. We can progress along that kind of gradient right now. Rural Metro does some scene work right now in Eugene.
They're just starting up some scene work in Eugene, and we see expanding that as time goes.
So that would be an example of us expanding the work that our private partners do right now. And generally, the task force, was a little gun-shy about a full private model, but was willing to discuss going further down and exploring additional scene work.
Just a quick question. Explain the first response cost, for instance, the $800,000 from Springfield. Are you saying that money would have to come from general fund, or what? Explain that part of it.
Yes.
Okay.
And so there's a little more explanation to that.
And that ain't.
We're required to do those functions now. Those functions are is part of ambulance fees, get paid out of ambulance fees. So if a firefighter is doing first response, we still have to do all those things. So right now it's ambulance dollars that pay for it. In a full private model, we would have to we would have to still fund those items.
If I could elaborate a little on that, Counselor, things like a medical director, all of our work that we do out on the street in protecting and serving the public, we operate under the license of a physician, and you need to have a physician overseeing your program whether you're providing ambulance service or we're responding with firefighter, EMTs, and paramedics on first response. There's also all the training that goes on, a lot of the infrastructure that we need, whether we're exclusively providing a fire first response or a fire first response and ambulance service.
So I have the next option.
Can I ask a question before? Somebody from the city of Springfield, how much should we subsidize from the general fund this year? Was it 500,000 or how many know that number?
It was zero this year. We are balanced. Last year, we believe we were balanced through FY13. It's FY14 that we go down again. Again, the work from the last task force put together with some of the strategies we've come up with our organizations. The analogy of the drowning person that's able to kick up and get a breath, and then they start going down again. That's where we are right now.
So option number 3 is an ambulance transport district. This would create a special district, service district. It's a revenue collection tool. Options are found in attachment B, AIS. So there's like a graph back there. It provides long-term financial stability. It requires individual financial statements and audits. Requires a vote. Could be a possible public vote. And it would take up to 2 years to implement. And the feasibility study would include a review of the master plan. A couple things that I want to say about this is that when we were talking about doing nothing, as Mr. Drew was saying about the service areas that we provide service to, that would help us capture some of those costs back at a lower rate if we were to go down this road. Right now, as he was saying, we provide provide ambulance service to outside fire districts. The only time we get any money out of them is actually money towards the actual cost of transport and not the kind of the nails and stuff that keeps the business going. So that would kind of help us in that area. I'm done.
I have the option matrix, which is basically taking all 3 of the options that we just discussed in specific terms and lining them up next to each other so you can see what occurs and doesn't occur, going down across the top of the 3 options and going down to the left, what applies and what doesn't apply as far as your funding, the general fund support, a permanent funding source. Each one is lined up so that you have an idea as to what coordinates with that particular plan. We basically talked about each one of these just now in the basic discussion or basic description, all the way down to the bottom one with the ambulance service areas and the medical director oversight. We would have to be in a contractual situation in any one of the options for medical director oversight. And I think another area to look at is the service in regards to the 3 different options. I'm pretty proud right now that we have a paramedic firefighter combination, and if we stretch out to the other options and we don't do it in some type of form of a gradient, we lose those. And I'm not sure. My opinion is I'm not sure that we might not want to go all that far. But this is pretty self-explanatory from the description that you were just given of the different options. So I don't think I need to go through it line by line. But it does line it up and give you an opportunity to see how they line up next to each other. And at this point, I turn it back over to the chief.
I believe it's Commissioner.
Yeah, I just kind of wrap up a little bit. As we looked at those 3 options as a task force, obviously the do-nothing side will end up with less capacity and higher costs to the individual general funds. And as we all 3 entities have just finished going through budget, we all understand that we don't exactly have extra money in our general funds to support ambulance service at this time. So that doesn't seem like a really great option or a long-term solution. Particularly, we did some projections out into the future, and that gap in funding becomes millions and millions of dollars for the 3 ambulance service areas. And I don't think any of us have that kind of capability in our general fund.
So can all the task force members make a comment? And can we have the lights on so that we can quit having the light show?
Yeah.
So this is my second tour of duty, as I like to put it, on this task force and on this issue. Being kind of close to firefighters and paramedics in my day job that I used to do, I kind of felt compelled to bring this forward as a conversation for the joint elected officials. We actually took this on 2009, and then we started from that point. But what the comments that I'd like to make are kind of throughout the whole process that we've gone through is, we're talking about sustainability of the ambulance transport services. It's going to need general fund support or a funding taxing district. But I'm concerned personally about the sustainability of our staff. The staff, Chief Groves and his command staff, have been spread pretty darn thin. And a lot of the comments that I heard from staff, we actually had a panel that I wish everybody could have been at, because they had the medical directors, they had line staff, they had training staff there. So we got to ask some pretty candid questions about their feelings, and I felt like they were pretty candid with us. One of the statements that I heard was that they're spread as thin as peanut butter can possibly get. One of the medical directors says that the ambulances are now fast food medicine. And I think the chief alluded to the fact in that one graph that shows that how many times they get called out and how many times they actually transport people. And actually, when they don't transport somebody, they make them sign a medical waiver so that the city isn't liable. So that's good. We need to really kind of start looking into the future for this. I think we're definitely in a different scenario. I'm not saying to do this overnight. It would take a 2-year to even really get looking at it. So I hope that you have versions 3 and 4 as we go along, Chief. Not that I personally want to be a part of that, but I do think that that we've really kind of pushed our staff and put them out on the bread as thin as peanut butter can get. I think that they're all working really hard, and I really have concern about the sustainability of how the model is today, with the chief being over both areas, and the training staff and the captains and the fire marshal and all that area. And not only to talk about, and that doesn't even talk about capacity for the firefighters and the paramedics and what they're having to deal with, going back and forth, how many trips they take, especially the medics when they're on certain units. They do a lot of stuff out there on the street. So I just hope that we can move on something and not just do nothing.
Jay, are you finished, or?
I would just add to that, the one thing that doesn't really come out in this is, like Councilor Ortiz said, is how thin we're spread right now, and the fact that we are on the edge capacity-wise. There are times, if there is an accident upriver, that we send a unit out of Springfield, way upriver to Leesburg or beyond, that unit may be tied up for several hours, so they shift capacity around between it, and maybe a Eugene unit starts covering part of Springfield. Well, if that unit's still way out river, and we get a call on the west side of town, we start shifting units, and eventually we get to a point where we've got units in transport at the hospital and all that. There are times when we really don't have another unit to call out in this area. Several times a day that happens. It's a regular occurrence that there's a possibility that the next accident won't have an ambulance ready to respond to. So our current system that we're quote, balance the budget on right now actually is not at the capacity of the demand. We don't really have the capacity in our system to meet the actual demand that's there. And that's not real clear in this report, and I just want to make sure people understand it, which is why we have such burnout with our paramedics, because they never stop. They clear one transport at the hospital, and they're on their way to the next one, and they never really get back into the station or anything. I mean, that's a long day, a long, stressful day for some of these guys. So that I just want to make sure that's understood. So the do nothing, I think, is a formula for ending up with a completely inadequate, overstressed system that's going to financially burden our cities and our fire districts.
I'll add to that. I did an ambulance ride along, and I wasn't there half an hour before we went out, and we had 5 calls before we got back to the station. It was one right after the other, and there were other calls going on at the same time. So there were people filling in for what we were covering right behind us, just as it's set up to do. and it was a regular weekday. There was no holiday. There was nothing going on that was going to create anything out of the usual course of a day. So it was, it was quite full, just like you described.
Does Jim want to say anything?
Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did not, Mayor. Thank you.
How about Jim?
And Jim, I'm going down the list.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I have something. I've actually worked on the ambulance. I was a firefighter, volunteer and a firefighter for almost 50 years. And I have worked on the ambulance. Our ambulance from Lane Rural has been as far east as Lowell multiple times. I've been up all night going from call to call to call. And this is Lane Rural. This isn't the city of Eugene. And there is a capacity problem, and it's growing.
Pete Holmes? Is he here?
Yeah.
You have anything you want to add?
I just say like that we need to, because with people that are paying, it's not fair to the average people that have to pay $1,600 for a ride when a lot of others aren't paying anything. And the only way that you can bring that price down, and we could lower that down with having a taxing district, and it would spread it out over everybody to cover it.
Thank you for that. So now we'll just open it up to questions or go ahead, Faye.
Thanks. I got a couple, 2-3 questions here. So maybe to build off that thought that you just said, Mr. Holmes, is if you went with a taxing district, is the intent that you wouldn't bill people, at least residents in the taxing district, or is there still going to be a billing?
That's yet to be determined. We just provide a model for the task force. We took the price down from $1,600 to $1,000. Just again, we just picked something, a point of reference. I would say I believe there needs to be some type of a fee to prevent overutilization. If something is completely free, I think our call volume would go even higher. So there needs to be a component of that, at least I believe.
But the difficulty there is if you lower the price down and you're making up the difference, it's hard to get the incentive not to use it, especially if somebody's got insurance. They'll still call and use it because they're not going to pay anything. So, another question, being I serve Cottage Grove and Oak Ridge and know that both South Lane and Oak Ridge are struggling with the same issue. Was there a discussion amongst the task force to maybe look at it might be easier to form a Lane County boundary-wide district instead of the one that just covers these 3 areas?
That discussion came up. The reason we formed the 3 central Lane County areas, it's hard enough to get everybody in the room together, and you start adding on more units of government, and it just is almost impossible to get everyone in the room at the same time. And even working as close of partnerships as we have in the 3 central Lane County areas, it's difficult, and there's only 2 chiefs that represent that whole area, and just getting us in the same room at the same time isn't always easy.
What I hear is that it's possible.
It's possible.
If this recommendation of a district moves forward, it's possible it could end up being a county-wide one. There's no reason not to say no at this point other than...
I think that's been brought to the table many times sitting on the task force, that keep an eye on the big picture. There are still other providers out there in Lane County, and always have them in the forethought also when we take a look at options.
And I would add, during the first task force that we got together in 2009, the other ASAs really wanted to come into the process, and our suggestion at the time was, let's see if we can come up with some solutions first in the area that is responsible for 80+% of the county's population. I know that even Western Lane, and I don't want to speak for them, but they did indicate that they were very interested in any discussions around a taxing district, and they're the only ambulance service area that does have a taxing district. They have a health district that they operate under.
Can I ask one final, please? And then the other question I had is that, so is it legal or not legal to send a bill to somebody that has Medicaid, Medicare? Can you recover any of the difference between the 405 and the 625, or is it just Is it just one of those that people don't have the money, or is there a legal question there?
There's a small component of copay, and we cannot collect beyond that. I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got Betty, and then Sherry, and then Andrea, and then Dave Ralston. So, Betty.
I'm not close to it, Mike, but let's see. Thank you. I have some questions. Do you advertise? I know I just got a mailing for the fireman.
Correct.
Right? And how much does that cost?
$62.
62 and 102. Yeah.
No, I think you're asking about how much the program costs or the advertising?
Cost of advertising, the mailing and any other advertising you do.
30% of the total program. Never spend enough on advertising.
The total advertising is 260. We have dramatically reduced it from the prior year.
It's about $260,000 for the whole Central Lane area, and we have dramatically reduced that from the previous years. That's part of that 30+% reduction in our overhead.
Mm-hmm. And TV and radio stations are supposed to do some public service work, right?
Correct.
Do they do any advertising for you free?
I believe we have a mix of PSAs and ads that we pay for. We basically negotiate a deal each year.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to reduce the amount of television and radio ads as part of this next year's campaign, again, as part of our cost reduction strategy.
Is there any effort to get them to contribute more time?
This is an area I don't personally deal with, but it's through the, that's why I keep looking back, it's through the negotiated contracts, we're always trying to increase the mix of that.
And one more question. I asked a previous chief a few times, is there any progress toward having a different fee for a single person?
For the fire med, at this
point? Fire med, You say no?
Not at this time.
It seems that you might get more people to subscribe if there were, because now it costs the same for a family of 10 as for. And one more question. Do you ever try to do your staff, do you ever try to do some help over the telephone to see, before you send a vehicle out?
Yes, our 911 center, Central Lane 911, has a program called Medical Priority Dispatching, and it is an algorithm that we walk the caller through trying to find out what the appropriate response is. And there's some calls that we go out on with a tiered response, which means you get the closest advanced life support fire suppression unit as well as the closest advanced life support ambulance, all the way down to nobody responds, and we direct them for help in another way. But it's the system defaults towards somebody going and checking on the person, because sometimes you have some symptoms in there which you're not comfortable with completely releasing the person without checking on them.
I understand that there's some people who say I'll be okay, and even if they won't. Okay, thank you.
Gary?
My question has to do with the merger that's occurring at this time with the Springfield, Eugene Fire Departments. Was there any discussion? We're going to have to look at some point in time funding, intergovernmental or taxing district, for the fire service. Was there any discussion in the panel about combining those, the fire as well as the ambulance service? When we look at, if we were looking at creating a taxing district, would it be possible to look at the fire service as well? Or is that just, because that's just Eugene, Springfield, a smaller area?
That issue actually did come up. I would turn that back to the task force members. I do know that we talked about it.
Yeah, one of the things with fire service is, we're dealing in that area we just saw was just 3 ambulance services.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably 12 fire districts inside that. I'm trying to think. There's Junction City. There's
17.
17. There we go. You know.
Wow, okay.
I was just taking a guess, But you take an area like Junction City Fire District where Lane Rural is actually the provider there. That's one of those areas where the citizens pay no general fund support for the ambulance, but they get the service on a fee basis. And that's one of the things an ambulance service district would correct. But there's all those various areas, and you'd have to get, to combine those two services. You start talking about multiple fire districts. We did talk about, where Florence actually annexed their fire department into the Siuslaw Fire District, and some of the past models that have been used to combine districts and merge, et cetera. But I think, when you're talking about 17 different jurisdictions just in that 3 ambulance service area, when you expand to the whole county, it's multiples more. It gets very, very complex to combine those two services together.
So just to follow up on that, so then when we're talking about ambulance service, are we just talking about transport? Because I assume even if we had an ambulance taxing district within Springfield, the fire truck would still show up with the emergency. You see what I'm saying? There is an overlap, and so
There is an overlap.
Would those continue? I guess that's a question to be answered by the taxing district, but it gets a little muddy.
It does, but right now, today, in both cities, we have an ambulance transport fund, which covers the ambulance service, and we have the general fund, which covers the fire response, which is fire, EMS first response, rescue, hazmat, that whole basket of services.
Thank you.
If I can elaborate a little bit, I won't speak for the whole task force on this, but in my mind, if we were to set up an ambulance district, it would contract with the individual providers, provide that service, basically. So, we have this entity called the Ambulance Service District, Central Lane Ambulance Service District or whatever, but it would probably pay Eugene, Springfield, and Lane Rural to provide the actual service. So you really won't, you the customer that calls 911 won't see any real difference in the service. They'll just have this revenue stream that's provided by the service district, and there'll be an elected board that runs that revenue, that taxing district.
Thank you.
Andrea?
So I have comments toward some of the questions, and actually these Faye and Councilor from Springfield actually kind of playing on each other. So we did talk about, or I did talk about, having us look at, we were talking, like we're at the 50-foot level, we're talking about the 5,000-foot level, and I took it up to 100,000 feet, because I do believe that there's some equity issues around how service is provided in this community in Lane County. I've witnessed some pretty large discrepancies on how patient care is done throughout the years from the smaller areas outside the main metropolitan area, and it isn't for lack of not wanting to do the best thing. It's for lack of the accessibility to training, to accessibility to having that relationship with the hospital for them to know the current trends. I think that eventually it would be responsible of us as elected officials to start having that conversation. Not that it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think that as the population grows, as we hope it will, and as the recession turns a corner and things are better, I think we really need to start having that conversation about how are we going to look as far as providing this emergency services in our community. There are counties, not that I know of not that I know very well, in Oregon. I know in Riverside County, where I come from, there is the Riverside Fire Department, and that includes EMS, and you have the same services out in the middle of Paris, which is out in the middle of nowhere, as you do downtown Riverside. There's equity in services, there's equity in funding for all these different firefighters and paramedics, and so I think that as we go down this road with your direction, that's kind of what we're coming here asking you all. What road do we want to go down? This is really those options, and that's what this conversation is about. It's going to be a long process. It's not going to happen anytime soon. At any point, we can always say, we don't want to go down this road. Chief, you need to come back to Eugene now. Springfield can hire their own chief, and, we can stop the conversation. But I think that it'd only be responsible. We've tried out this merger with the fire department with sharing chiefs. I think the next step would be to start looking down the road at an ambulance transport district.
Dave Ralston.
Thank you. So, I just have comments about all this. Being on the first task force, I think that the first two task forces have done an excellent job of identifying the problems, coming up with possible solutions, and doing nothing to me is absolutely not an option. Privatization doesn't really fix the problem. It just adds more layers and complexity, and so to me, you just got to put the blinders on and say this is what we got to do. And the taxing district is really the only option. And inequity for fairness to everyone and cutting the costs. If I recall correctly, I asked the question before on the first task force. If everyone was a member of FireMed, we wouldn't have a problem, right?
Actually, we're to the point now where I'm not sure that would completely fix.
Okay, but still,
It would help, yeah.
Just take that as an example. Right now, $62. If everybody in Lane County or in our area paid that money, we wouldn't be talking right now. So, when you look at creating a taxing district that's going to raise enough money to fix the long-term problem that we have, we're only talking about $60, $70 a year, right, per household.
We actually did some analysis, and again, it's very rough analysis, but we tried to look at, worked with the county assessor's office. We actually made a presentation back to the task force of what it would look like. To set the parameters, it would reduce the fee for service down to just $1,000, and again, we just picked a number there. We also looked at adding a additional ambulance in the system in the first year with a second additional unit. I think it was 2020, and we took it out to 2030, so 18 years. And I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was around 46 cents per thousand.
Okay, so 46 cents per thousand.
47 cents per thousand.
I mean, that's nothing. I mean, a $100,000 house, what's that, $46? So, I mean, really, to me, we got to put the blinders on and just say this is what we got to do. And if it takes 2 years to do it, I think we need to get going.
And to be clear on setting that number, we looked at it would create a reserve in the early years, a deficit in the latter years, but it would balance out over the long haul.
Yep. So that's all I got to say.
Did?
So on the, as far as the service district, I mean, I would be interested in exploring it, but I would also, I can't say enough right now to all of you the amount of strain that is on the assessor's office right now, and so it's enormous. And so if you're looking at potentially creating this service district, this is a really good test case to actually offset the cost to the assessor's office by having a built-in fund in there, make sure the assessor's office is staffed. That's my view right now, because right now, Chief Groves, you talked about the drowning victim. So far, we don't know for sure yet, but we think that Annette received a gulp of air. But the legislature hasn't quite made that final piece on it yet. So we're still working with the legislature and the Department of Revenue. But hopefully we give her a gulp of air on this one. So the other, though, I think when I was looking at the statistics in the Lane County aging population, I think the one area that was missed, and I would really hope that as the task force is looking at this and others, is what's happened to the youth of Lane County. If you look at the 2000 census, the 2010 census, it's actually dropped from 75,000 to 69,000. And the problem is, who's making that up? We're still growing as a county. So people are moving in here, and the problem is they're not the youth. They're not young. And so you look at that 70% number, I see that number just gradually creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. And so that's a real, and I remember about 3-4 years ago, we had a Team Springfield meeting, and the school district brought forth a statistic that was almost numbing at really when you looked at it. And that was with the closure of Hynex and Monaco, what that did, not to students, but it was hundreds of families left the area. And so when we were having the conversation with our health department, and Dr. Ludke came up and was presenting to the budget committee, it was really interesting about why the Lane County Health and why health departments strongly support a vibrant economy, and how economic development is such a huge piece of that, because it lessens the strain that is put on our health system. So those are my two thoughts here. If we're going to go down the service district idea, I would hope that there is a discussion about making sure there's some sort of funds available for the assessor's office, because if there isn't, you may not be collecting. And that is, right now, unless the law's changed, and Ed Spickard is responsible for collecting the bucks if this is put in place. So that's the only thing I would add. But also, I would hope that we would take a stronger look at the idea of the youth in Lane County and what's happened there, but yet the population continues to grow. Thank you.
Kind of in conjunction with that, we have, I don't know how long they're going to go, how deep they are, and how successful they're going to be, but we have big changes afoot in terms of health care provision in Oregon, and we sort of need to have fold that conversation into this conversation, because what we do with that will affect the needs of ambulance services and how we address health issues. So,
in the middle of that one too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's a very important discussion that we need to keep our eyes on.
And Mayor, if I could just comment on that, we do now have somebody sitting at the table, Brian Evanoff, our Administrative Services Bureau Manager, and we were able to actually, Councilor Ortiz helped open the door for us, so we do have somebody sitting at the table on that, but the initial discussions didn't include anything about ambulance.
And I just think there's different levers that are going to be happening here that could change the picture, and we need to keep our eyes on those things. And then, Christine, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Well, probably my first question is, the task force has completed your work, and this is a recommendation, so whatever we do from this point on is going to be individual discussions. Okay, so I guess from my perspective is this has been a very, we're all here together, and it's a brief presentation, so we're sort of looking at the blush of the options, because I think there's lots of questions, and I think you make a good point about health care, because we have lots of layers of, who are we, responding to all the time? Not just age, but what kind of calls, etc. There's a lot of discussion. So, not wanting to go down any specific path at the moment. I think we have lots and lots to talk about. So, I would definitely want to say that the health care, what kind of calls, the age issue, all of the things that we need to look at so we can make some policy choices about what we want to have ambulance service look like. Then we can make that discussion as to what we want to do about it. But
and we did provide all that information to the task force, recognizing that it took us from October to now to bring them up to speed and trying to condense this down into a short presentation for the larger group.
Understood.
Dave?
Thank you. I just wanted to voice my support for the continued work on a district. And I would encourage looking first at an entire countywide district. I think it might be easier to describe. It would be easier, hopefully, to across. I also, as Mr. Drew had pointed out, that he's personally responded to Lowell. Well, that's outside of all the districts here, and so I think this is a critical service. I don't know about equity, but it would sure be nice if we worked as a region and we were able to help each other. And I know there's cross lines help. People come to help South Lane. South Lane sometimes has the ability to go help somebody else. It just makes sense to make it a county-wide district, and so I would support continued work on that and see if we can put together something that the citizens would support.
Andrea?
So, Chief, not to belabor it, but you had a feasibility study done, and what was the recommendations from this?
I'm sorry, which one is that?
The 2009 feasibility study that the chiefs...
Oh, the merger piece? Okay. I'm sorry. We had several studies done. We had one done on the ambulance service district. The Lane Fire Defense Board commissioned that through LCOG. This one here was through Emergency Services Consulting International, and they recommended that we proceed with fire merger. They said up to and including a fire district.
So experts from outside of our area have come, and this is kind of their expert opinion of the road we should be taking. So as we go back to our own to our own councils for this further discussion, there's a lot of work that's been done around this, and it all kind of is pointing us in the same direction. So there's a lot of stuff to read. The chief has it all, so I would hope that the councilors take an opportunity to read about all the stuff that the chief has been researching.
The other thing I will say about that particular report, I don't believe it's in the report, but it was in the presentation when they reported out to both city councils, that more often than not, when they do one of these studies, they actually recommend not to merge. But in this case, they felt it made sense, and a lot of it had to do with proximity, the way the station placement geographically was set up, and just the way we operate. It made sense in their analysis.
And I just want to kind of add one more thing. Sorry, Mayor, I know I'm being chatty. As we look at our community, and if we look at it regionally, we have a regional health center here. We have Riverbend in Springfield, and that really is the epicenter for a lot of different studies and national benchmarks for a lot of healthcare issues: strokes, heart attacks, traumas, babies. And so, when you think about healthcare in that sense, when we're looking from that birth to death kind of thing, it only would make sense that if we're looking at this part and what role the city has, definitely a piece with the youth. Why are our youth declining and why aren't they healthier? Definitely has a conversation piece, and that really wasn't something we talked about. We didn't really look at that demographics. But I think that, regionally we need to be looking at this at that 100,000-foot level, because I think that eventually there's that line. I know we have a lot of perhaps cultural differences, but I think it's going to get blurred the bigger our community grows, and I would hate to be not planning for the future.
And just one other thing I would add to that, Councilor, is we also, Peace Health has been a very good partner, but McKinsey Willamette has as well, and they've been entering into a number of studies that they've included us in as well, and trying to wrestle down some of the same issues that we're dealing with, but on the receiving facility side.
Thank you. Sid?
Just a question on the, when I saw the numbers between Eugene, Springfield, Corvallis, and Bend on the Medicaid, Medicare. So we're 70% here, Corvallis 59, Bend 55.
And that's the payer mix of our transports.
Okay, and so that was up through when? 2009, 10, do you know, offhand? And the only reason why I asked that question is again, and I relate a lot of this back to the economy because if you look at Benton County traditionally has had the lowest unemployment rate out of any county in the state. And in the last decade, Bend exploded economically. Now, they've had their fair share of stress the last 3 years or so, but so I was just kind of trying to figure if was that over the past decade, or, and if you don't have it now, that's fine, and if you wouldn't mind, maybe...
It's in the, Commissioner, it is in the...
information. It is in there? Okay.
I found it as soon as I sat down before we started.
Okay.
2009?
Okay, yeah. That's kind of what I thought. And so when I was looking at those numbers, and it's, now, have you looked at maybe what's the main reason why this Eugene Springfield is so high, comparatively speaking to, say, Corvallis and Bend? I mean, has that question maybe been asked?
Anecdotally, it has. We have not delved into why. I do know that as you get towards a larger metropolitan area like we do, we tend to have more care facilities, which we get a certain number of in-place residents that aren't necessarily from the metro area. They could come from further away. But again, I'm speculating on that, and I was just taking some of the statistics to show the different payer mix. In fact, that same article I would encourage you all to read. The reporter was talking to an official in Bend, and he expressed dismay that we weren't raising the rates higher than we were, how we could make it on what we were charging. So, and I've had these same conversations with our counterparts. We're not doing this work in isolation, and we're very well connected. In fact, frequently we're looked at as a leader in the industry.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Really?
I just wanted to respond to the timing question or situation. It's been brought up a couple times, but the do nothing is not an alternative. It's not an option. And our timing, as we looked at things and as what was presented, we're looking at it at being okay at 2014, a critical year. So I think this type of situation discussion needs to take place now with all this information so that we can make some decisions so that we don't have a disaster on hand in 2014. So I think we really do need to look and figure how collectively we can encounter this and make it work in whatever funding sense seems to be the best and head that direction. And I think as we go back to our own groups, our own organizations, I think we need to spend some time and soon to go over all of it. Yeah, to go over all of the aspects of it and come to a thing so we can come back together and collectively make a decision and move. I like your word. But yeah, I think that's the timing is of essence at this point.
Okay, chatty Kathy.
Okay, I just want to.
Wow, I
That's all. You just pulled her back and she just walked and talked. So, and we don't have a 3-minute timer here. So, so I just wanted to say thank you to the staff that worked on this because I think that there was a lot of staff hours from both Eugene, Springfield, and from Lane Rural. I think there was a lot of faces there, and from Metro.
Rural Metro.
Rural Metro. Thank you. Their participation was critical. They did a really good presentation. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we had our union representatives there too, kind of talking to us along the way after the meetings and stuff. And so I think we've had a lot of really good community input with this. And so I would hope that, you really kind of review the stuff as it goes along so that it's fresher. I mean, it was 2 years since we had actually worked on it the last time, so there was a lot of catching up to do. So it would be hopeful that, we could move on, talk about it at our own council sooner than later, so then that way we don't have to, ask the staff to go back and do more work, to make it more current.
At one point on that as well, I failed to mention earlier, in the 2009 task force, a part of that work did include, I believe it was 12 or 13 community outreach meetings.
Oh, yeah.
We were a part of, and I know, Councilor, you attended some of those. Different task force members attended with Chief Murphy, Chief Borland, and myself.
So I just want to express, again, I think on behalf of all of us, appreciation to the task force. Actually, I think that both iteration 1 and 2 done some very substantial work, and of course to our firefighting operations. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done. It just seems to me that, and listening to all of you, that we just need to get ourselves on a timeline. We have information, we just need to get working on it, and if you work like we do, it'll take a few meetings to get there. So I think we just have to, and I appreciate your suggestion that we look at when we think we need to have made up our, come to a conclusion and work back from there and try to all arrive at a point of decision making in time to meet the goal, so to speak. So thank you all very much, and I think it was a good discussion, and I know we'll have a lot more. Thank you all. I'm going to close the Eugene City Council meeting.
Lane County Board of Commissioners.
And Springfield City Council's adjourned.
Thank you.
Been fun.